Chapter 28. April 9th, 2173. 2128 set. Ilium, Thessali system. Nos Astra. As you probably know, began Nisko, we all have a field that makes us valuable to each other. He pointed at Sicurio, said, weapons, and moved his finger to Nesara, Detayovi, and finally himself while saying, property, communication, and information. And for me, it is finances. So there is something that my company and I excel in that you would like to take advantage of. Am I right? I guessed, or at least as much as one could guess after having it basically declared to your face. Taking advantage of is such an ugly phrase for what we are doing, chuckled Nisko. Of course it is, I responded with a chuckle of my own. Playing along with the illusion that everyone here wasn't using the others to their benefit was probably the best I could do at the moment. Everyone here allows the others limited access to their resources to help them in their endeavors, said Nesara, continuing the conversation. How much the others are allowed to access is a matter negotiated between individuals, but certain criteria have to be fulfilled by every member. And what are those criteria? I asked. But the words barely left my mouth when I spoke up once again. Wait, before going on to that, you haven't told me what my specialty is supposed to be yet. Ah, it seems we deviated a bit from that point, conceded Nisko. You're not as deeply invested in one field as us, but you more than compensate for that by having a broader spectrum than us. Nesara, for example, could use a slightly cheaper source of materials for all of her ongoing real estate projects. That's true, commented the mentioned Asari. Most of my customers, especially those in Asari space, are very demanding when it comes to their wishes. Some of the buildings they want are so over the top that it is an ordeal getting the materials on time, and within the price range they agreed to, of course. A reliable source would be a blessing. And you want me to be this reliable source? I asked, even if I knew the answer already. Yes, if I remember correctly, you started your career mostly as a mining company, am I right? And you didn't stop that part of your business after you went into the shipbuilding sector, right? Well, it seems that they did their homework too. Just like I researched them, they probably had people collect every bit of information about me they could get their hands on. It was a good thing. I knew from the beginning that I wouldn't work together with incompetent people, no matter how long this relationship would last in the first place. But to get confirmation did reassure me somewhat. And at the same time, it reminded me to be wary. Those people were not the same small-time fish I had to deal with most of the time. They would notice if I moved against them too openly, and I had to be careful not to fall for a trap of their making. Perhaps I should ask Andrew if he wrote a playbook for his shadow war with the STG, and if I could borrow it. I would certainly need it with these people. And who to better take advice from than the master of covert actions? That's correct, I answered Nesara. Most of the materials go directly into my own factories, but I see no problem to direct some of them your way as long as the demands are not too outrageous. It's not like I don't have other sources available. It's just that they can't fulfill my orders in a timely manner. Yes, you have lamented often enough about how the building specifications your customers insist on are eating up resources like black holes, interjected Detiobi. And before you ask, she continued, turning toward me with a stern look, I do not need anything from you. I was against you joining our group in the first place. Mirala, said Nisko reproachfully. I know, okay? The circle makes its decisions by majority vote. You mentioned that often enough that I dream about that. If you want something, you pay for it. Understood, Denebrin? I nodded wordlessly, showing that I indeed understood what she meant. The fact that she left out how I would pay or what services she offered was telling. She expected me to find it out myself, or I wouldn't be worth her time. Good, Detiobi said. Just don't expect me to clean up behind you if you find your face on the cover of some trash magazine, at least without paying the appropriate price. You have done a good job so far with that, but if you're going to do business with Cicerio, it's going to happen sooner or later. I had to keep his name out of the news often enough to know that it's only a matter of time till it happens again. Shut up, bitch, Cicerio almost screamed, and I think he was embarrassed that it was the truth. His name did come up a few times in some news reports, but it disappeared just as fast. Detiovi ignored Cesario's outburst and continued to look at me. Just a friendly word of warning if you don't want to find your face plastered over the covers of my magazines. Don't try to mess with me, or I'll burn your public life down to the ground. With her warning given, Detiovi stood up from her chair and made to leave the room without waiting for any confirmation on my part or giving me time to respond to her threat. When she arrived at the door to the conference room, she said over her shoulder, "As I said, I have a dinner reservation. You can finish this without me. Yes, good." And with her last words said, she left the room, not taking a single look back at the other occupants. With her departure, a moment of awkward silence permeated the room. Even the constant breathing noises of Nisko Ron's environmental suit seemed to be silent. "Well," said Nassara into the silence, "we all knew that Morala can be quite eccentric, and now our newest member has an idea what to expect when he's going to do business with her." "I've heard as much, but to see it is another thing completely," I commented, still a bit stunned at her sudden departure. "She's a stuck-up bitch. That's what she is," snorted Cicerio derisively. "Thinks she is better than any and all, and she's not shy to show it. Don't believe anything you've heard about her being kind and generous," he said, turning to me. "That's the brainchild of her personal PR team. She wouldn't give a single credit to a starving orphan if he begged at her feet." He added quietly, "The only thing that's good about her is her azure. Can't believe I had feelings for her for a time." Cicerio said this so quietly to himself that I was sure we weren't supposed to hear that. And if the other heard him as I did, then they showed nothing of it. "Let's get back on track," said Nisko Ron, trying to get the conversation going again, and this time with the right topic. "As Morala said, you don't have anything that interests her for now. That can change at a moment's notice. She's whimsical like that. Perhaps more interesting is what Cicerio wants. It's, after all, something within your power to grant." "Oh? I guess it has something to do with the armaments I produce," I questioned. Instead of Nisko Ron, Cicerio answered, since he was the one we were talking about. "Correct," he confirmed simply. "I've got contacts all over the galaxy, and not just inside Citadel space. Those guys in the Terminus systems are always looking for something that can give them an edge over their rivals. And then their rivals go looking for an even better edge, and so on. Out there, it's almost like you have to sell only just one good gun, and you create a continuous cycle of customers. So as long as you can keep your inventory stocked, there's a steady income." "And I'm your inventory in that case?" Not really," laughed Cicerio off with a shrug. "I got most of the things they want covered. My usual suppliers are good enough for them. But if you want, I could add yours to my assortment. There are always some people looking for exotic weaponry, and human weapons still belong to that category. And if you got some combat vehicle that you don't need anymore, then I wouldn't say no to buying them from you." "I have to decline on the combat vehicles for now," I answered with my hands raised in an apologizing manner. "Most of them go directly to the Alliance military or the colony defense forces. It would be quite bad for my company if those suddenly appeared in the Terminus systems. The same could be said for anything the military uses. But if you're looking to sell inside Citadel space, then I could at least open our civilian line of products for you. And if some of them happen to disappear into the Terminus systems, well, my company can't be held accountable for the decisions of others." "Of course not," snorted Cicerio. "I'll let you know if something comes up." I answered his offer with a slightly grateful nod in his direction. It would probably be an advantage if my civilian weapons got disseminated a bit more. It would hopefully create the beginnings of a brand awareness I could cash in down the line. On the other hand, if they started to appear in the Terminus systems, it could mean bad PR. Well, when they started to appear there in mass, I'm sure some were already appearing out there, but in such a small volume that it was negligible. It didn't matter how good your security was, something always leaked through. "Anyways," continued Cicerio, "what I really need is a means of transporting my goods. I recently made a deal with a Turian major. The Turian military is about to refit their soldiers. That means guns, armor, and vehicles are about to be exchanged for new ones. Normally, the old ones would be taken apart and their parts reused. But the major in charge of that is selling me the old ones for a good price. Some money goes into the rearmament and some into his personal accounts. The latter is, of course, just a little consultation fee for helping me make everything legal. Also, thanks again for getting me into contact with that lawyer, Nisko. It was no problem, Nisko Ron inclined his head. Making sure that no trouble comes up that could rebound on this group is also one of my tasks. One that you took over voluntarily, interjected Nasara. Somebody has to do it, or not, responded Nisko Ron, and even through the voice modulation of his environmental suit, I could hear that he was annoyed about the fact. If I hadn't intervened at times, our connections with each other could have put us all in a hairy situation because some weren't careful enough with what they were doing. Please calm down, Nisko. We've gone over that situation often enough, and nothing similar happened since then, placated Nasara, who shot a look at Cesario, telling him without words to be quiet on the matter while she tried to diffuse the situation. She started with a careless remark. Thankfully, he understood what Nasara wanted from him, and he didn't add more fuel to the fire to derail our conversation. Instead, he turned back to me and said, when the Turian military finally gets started with their rearmament, I will need enough ships with big cargo holds to transport everything to a warehouse I already organized, and I will need ships to transport them to my potential buyers. Are you looking to buy some or just rent them? I asked. If it's possible, I would rather rent them. That way I can rent multiple ships for the same price. I would buy one in the same category. Do you have ships for transporting tanks and the like? Ones that aren't normally for military use? The bigger mining ships should be enough. The amount of materials they transport and the equipment they need for the mining itself is enormous. Should be enough to transport 3 or 4 tanks easily. I would need the specifications of the tanks before I can make any definite promises. But it should be possible. Great, said Sekiro with a smile. I'll let you know when I know more about the job. As long as you tell me in advance so that I have the chance to organize the SIPs, everything should go well. By the way, I would like to get paid with a percentage of the profits you make with the arms you're getting, and you cover the bills for the used fuel. Of what percentage did you think? 40. 40? Cesario almost screamed. That's basically robbery. I'm the one organizing the deals, and it's by my hand that those deals are even possible. 10% at max. So you say, but how are you going to transport them, huh? You said it yourself. You need my ships, and I don't know anyone who could lend you ships like those you will need. 35, I countered with a savage grin. There are some out there. It wouldn't be cheap, but still cheaper than what you're demanding. Also, I'm the one covering the costs of storing them until I can find a buyer. And that's my job too. 15, I'll wait. Yes, that may be, but there's one thing you're forgetting. What I am demanding is to cover the costs of collecting them from your Turian contact, delivering them to your warehouse, and then the delivery to your customer as well. If you're looking for someone else to do it, then you can be sure that you're going to have to make the deal for the ships twice. Those people you know won't keep the ships on standby till you find a buyer. That's 2 times the cost, plus extra fees, because when you find a buyer, they have to pull the ships from other jobs, since the delivery must happen fast or your buyer is going to be pissed. 30, it went on like this for some time until Cesario and I agreed that I would get 24% of every arms deal he would make with the old equipment of the Turian military he acquired. Be it tanks, APCs, airships, rifles, or old body armor. In return, I would handle the transport for everything, and not just for the vehicles. While we were negotiating, Nasara and Nisko Ron watched our conversation, their heads turning from one person to the other like they were watching a tennis match. It seems like you found one of the advantages as a circle member, commented Nisko when our negotiations ended. As long as we're in private like this, our negotiations with each other don't have to follow the same protocols as we would have to if we did it in a meeting room at one of our companies. I would like to believe that this way is more efficient. If you two would like to, I could take care of the official contract between you two. My lawyer is familiar with the necessary additions for a circle contract. Should be all right from my side, agreed Cesario with a shrug. What about you, Denebrin? My eyes narrowed at Nisko Ron, my mind fixated on a term he used. Before I agree, what's a circle contract? Ah, exhaled Nisko. I wanted to explain that peculiarity later on, but since we already mentioned it, I see no reason not to explain it now. Nisko fidgeted on his chair for a bit, probably deciding where to begin with his explanation. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw how Cesario threw Nasara a brief look, which she stoically ignored. Now that I thought about it, it wasn't the first time Cesario looked in Nasara's direction, but she never acknowledged any of them. Before I could think further on the matter, Nisko coughed slightly to get my attention, and he said, "Essentially, it's a tradition dating back centuries when the Circle of Alamina was comprised solely by Asari. They wanted to work together like business partners, but also towards a common goal. To prevent the leaking of Circle secrets, they pooled some of their assets together, and every member had to sign a contract that stated that if they sold any secret to an outsider, their part in the common trust fund would be forfeited." "So there's a common trust fund," I interjected, finally finding out why they were even working together in the form of the Circle. "Who's the one in charge of the trust fund? I hope it's not you. I would feel a little bit uncomfortable if it's a member of our group." "Nobody of us knows," Nasara threw in. "I've never met this person, and I'm the member with the longest time in the Circle." "You have never met this person," I repeated incredulously, raising an eyebrow in her direction. "It's the truth," defended Nasara. "All I know is that it's an Asari, and she's doing this since the founding of the Circle. She never involves herself in our affairs, and only intervenes if there's an accusation of broken trust between two members. Ayala is right. We don't know who it is, only that she looks over our trust fund. By the way, as a new member, you're expected to pay into it. Normally, we would expect a percentage of your whole company, but since the economy protection laws concerning the Alliance are still viable for a few years, we expect you to transfer 20% of your company here on Ilium to the trust fund." If he meant to intimidate me with that number or the fact that I would lose more than half of my company branch here on Ilium if I betrayed their trust to outsiders, then he was wrong. I didn't even blink when I nodded at his demand and gestured with my hand carelessly to show him to get on with it. In any case, the resources we pool together can be used if more than half of our group decides to use them for something. For example, if there is a business rival that is a thorn in our side, we use the trust fund to buy up every share of his company. 25% go back into the fund, and the remaining 75% is split up between us. That way, the fund is always growing. Of course, should we decide not to do anything, then there's a yearly payout. In regards to Circle contracts, a percentage of every business deal made between members of the Circle goes into the fund as well. "And I guess using the fund against a member of the Circle is prohibited?" I asked. "That's correct. Should a member even suggest such a thing, half of their security deposit will be seized by the Circle fund," clarified Nisko. Interesting, I thought. So if I wanted to use the resources of the Circle of Alamina for my own benefit, then I would have to look for opportunities that help not only me, but at least two other people of the Circle too. It should be easy to find something that benefited one person, but the second one would be harder. Finding common ground with Cesario would probably be easy enough, but including a third person in our plans would be difficult. No matter, an excellent opportunity will reveal itself. That's just the way the business world works. If one kept their eyes open and waited long enough, there would always be something. One just had to grab it. "Before I sign anything," I said, turning to Cesario, "I would like to see the additions that make our contract a Circle contract, if that's all right with you." "It will take some time until I can pick up anything anyway," shrugged Cesario. "So I see no problem with waiting for the contract to be signed." "I'll send you the finished contract," promised Nisko, and added a note on his Omni tool. "I believe that should be everything for today." "Just one more thing," I stopped Nisko from getting up. "You still haven't told me what I can do for you, Nisko. I know that you will be able to help me by letting a few million credits disappear. So what is it you want?" Nisko sat back down on his chair and started to chuckle a bit. "I would have preferred if we did this in private, but I'm not disinclined to discuss this here and now. There are not many things we can't discuss in this room after all." "I don't care either way," I conceded, "but I am rather curious, so please tell me. Thanks to the deal you negotiated with the Citadel, it's almost impossible to influence the economy of the Alliance. There are too many regulations to make money easily in the Alliance territory. It's a bother." "You call it a bother, I call it the protection of human interest," I countered. "Let's just say we won't ever agree on that point before we lose ourselves in a pointless argumentation." "I can live with that," I agreed with a nod. So what is it you want? Nisko stayed quiet for a moment, his silence only interrupted by his breathing noises. I want an in on the human stock market. It's only a matter of time until the deal you negotiated has run its course, and from that moment on, every broker worth his name is going to concentrate on the human stock market. The prices will be going through the roof, and I just want to be earlier than anyone else. And you think I will be able to help you? I asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, Nisko answered simply. I'll give you the necessary money and you finalize the transaction. Furthermore, you hold on to the stocks until I can take possession of them legally. Of course, the payout of those stocks goes to me, excluding a small fee for your troubles. Seems good to me, I said. But why me? You could probably ask any human here on Ilium to do this for you. Because I can ask any human here on Ilium, repeated Nisko back to me. But I won't. I didn't get to the position I now have by just asking the next person. I waited until I found the perfect person. To be careful means to minimize the risks, and I am nothing but a careful person. Having you as my middleman, bound by a circle contract to our agreement, is better than anything else. Any other human could either run away with my stocks, or he and I could be penalized by the Alliance for foreign influences on the market. And you think those risks don't exist with me? I asked, rather amused that Nisko was thinking this way. You're the only human I've come into contact with that would enter with me into a contract where he would lose probably more than gain if he double-crossed me. I didn't hide the bemused smile that played on my lips. Secondly, he continued, the normal consequences of helping an alien getting an in into the human market don't apply to you. Nobody in the Alliance is going to commit career suicide by charging you for anything. The smile didn't leave my face the whole time Nisko Ron was giving me his sales pitch. What could say at that moment? That he was wrong and some ambitious person would try to drag me in front of a court? Not even I could sell that lie to my current crowd. So I kept silent and continued to listen. So, what do you say? Asked Nisko after he explained some more details of his plan. It does sound intriguing, but before I commit to anything, I would like to see what stock papers you have in mind, I said, trying not to commit to anything. That can be arranged. I nodded at him and started to get up from my chair. I think that should be everything for today, don't you? A quick look around the room, and I couldn't see anybody making any moves to stop me from leaving. After a round of farewells, I left the room and the building the same way I entered it. When I arrived at the landing platform, I stopped for a moment to stroke over my left eyebrow with my right thumb. After all, it's important to notify the teams tasked with protecting you that everything went fine and that they don't have to expect trouble following me. They would still guard my back until I arrived safely at my home, but it would probably help them relax a bit. I didn't have to wait much longer until my shuttle arrived, and I didn't even wait until the side door fully opened before I jumped in and told my driver to bring me home. As I leaned back into my comfortable couch, I let out a sigh. Today's evening had been exhausting, but successful. Truth be told, I couldn't wait to see if my new business friends were truly going to be an enrichment or not. One thing I knew for sure, I would come out ahead in the end no matter what. Chapter 29. July 27, 2173, 2027. Ilium, Thessaly System, Nos Astra, Seola Restaurant. I put the glass of wine back on the table after taking a sip of the exquisite Asari wine imported from Lucia. The taste of the wine fit perfectly with the steak I ordered. The Thessian Red would have been an even better fit since it was the one the waitress recommended. Yet, I didn't order that one. After all, the waitress was an Asari and seemed to forget one important fact. I was human and not an Asari. Everything that grew on Thessia was laced with Ezo since its concentration was so high on the planet. And thanks to that, the wine was also laced with Ezo, and most humans wouldn't be able to drink it without getting sick after. A shame, really. I would have liked to try it. My eyes roamed the restaurant, looking for one person. She hadn't arrived yet, but I was sure it wouldn't take long for her to show up. Her and her escort. I knew who her escort was, and a smile appeared on my face when I thought about what was going to happen. Still, I would have to wait, but the meal was good enough to bridge the time. I was back only Ilium for only a few days, having been back in Alliance territory for most of the last 3 months. The time I spent here on Ilium was productive, but I had to travel back for a while. Spending time away from my original power base for so long wasn't something anyone should do if they wanted to keep their power stable. And I wasn't just talking about those that saw my absence as an opportunity to attack my company by economic means like Henry Lawson tried to do. That man didn't seem to understand that no matter what he did, I would end up on top. He was like an unruly child that you had to put into timeout again and again because it didn't seem to learn from its mistakes. But he wasn't the only one trying to undermine me and my own company. Perhaps Lawson was the most persistent of the people trying to do so from the outside, but the most annoying guys were those hired by me. These people that were sitting in places I put them in, financing their lifestyle with the money I paid them to do their job, enjoying the privileges that came with working for me, and then they have the gall to want more without doing more, or even better, trying to replace me. I knew that power and influence could get to one's head, and it happened even to me from time to time. But to think that they could use the power I gave to them to climb up the ranks in my company to one day dethrone me from my position? Delusional was too weak a word to describe their madness. Thanks to that, I had to leave Ilium for a spring cleaning at my company. Well, there were some events for which I would have to go to anyway. So it wasn't bad that I went a little earlier than I planned. Furthermore, it gave me the opportunity to observe how stable my operations on Ilium were and how my induction into the circle would change my position. I knew my new associates, and I used the word cautiously, wouldn't try to go for my throat so shortly after our first meeting. They were more patient and careful than that. But what would happen if I gave them an opening like that, leaving my Ilium company branch in the hands of someone that wasn't me? Would they make a mistake? Would someone else crawl out of the dark and try to do something? In the end, nothing out of the ordinary happened, and now that I was back, there wouldn't be anyone brave enough to go through with their plans. Still, I used the time away from Ilium well. There had been a couple of matters that deserved a personal touch, and it would work wonders for my position if I didn't delegate them. One such matter was my attendance at the first ever graduation ball held for every person of the Terra Nova University, the university I founded, that achieved a bachelor's or master's degree since its opening. My appearance, combined with a simple speech in honor of all graduates, was enough to cement an image in their minds that portrayed me as a supporter of the new generation. The generous job offerings I gave out to those that got high marks throughout their studies helped too. Most thought it was to reward their hard work and that I acknowledged those giving their all. I didn't comment on that line of thought, even if the truth was that I just wanted the best people I could get my hands on working for me. Furthermore, I didn't give out many job offers anyway, because around 3/3 of the people with the highest marks already signed a contract with Ad Astra before they even started their studies. They were the ones that had benefited from my scholarship program, where I paid for their tuition and housing as long as they were students of the Terra Nova University and held themselves to certain standards. And no, those standards did not include that they had to finish their bachelor's degree in 3 years. As someone who took longer than that in my old life, I wouldn't put them under this pressure. I wanted them to enjoy their lives as students too. Perhaps that was one of the reasons why the fight for a place in the scholarship program was so heated. One of the managers I put in charge of the program joked that if they wanted, they could organize cage fights between the applicants, and everyone would sign up in a heartbeat. As amusing as the picture was, it painted an accurate portrayal of the situation. Thankfully, the number of approved applicants would rise in the coming years, as I didn't believe for a second that the number of hopefuls would decline in the meantime. That was due to the fact that every person who received the benefits of the scholarship was obligated to pay back the costs that accumulated during their studies at no interest, so that another could benefit from it as well. Additionally, there was the option to become a benefactor of the scholarship program and donate money that they could deduct from taxes as long as the donation was above a minimum limit. I talked with dozens of people during the ball that had benefited from my scholarship program, and while not one had paid back their loan, they all assured me they would become benefactors of the program to give even more youths the same chance they got. I was just grateful that their talents would help Ad Astra to grow even more in the near future. And speaking of growth, it wasn't just my company that grew steadily in power, but the Alliance as well. James heard that I was back in Alliance territory and took the chance to invite me to dinner with his wife. While I was grateful for the chance to catch up and learn more about the current situation of the Alliance, another point that made me accept the invitation was that Wright lived on Earth, the planet I was born on and hadn't visited for more than 5 years by now. Or had it even been longer? One would expect that seeing Earth from space wouldn't be something special after traveling through the galaxy and seeing dozens of different planets and a space station that could house millions upon millions of people. But they would be wrong. Utterly wrong. The moment Earth appeared in the distance, my heart began to beat faster, and my breath got stuck in my throat when the blue planet showed its full beauty through the window of the observation deck of my personal starship. I hadn't even noticed that I opened a communications channel to the pilot to tell him to wait a moment before he started the landing process. Seeing Earth somehow got me all emotional, and I started to wonder if those who didn't have the chance to travel back to Earth felt something like homesickness or longing to see the world humanity originated from again. Furthermore, we, which means us humans, have been exploring the galaxy and colonizing new planets for more than 20 years now. There were thousands of young adults and even more children that had never seen Earth in the first place, and most of them would probably never do so in their lives. What would they feel if they could see our homeworld? Would they just see another planet populated by humans? Or would they see it as their homeworld too? Would they somehow feel a connection to this planet? Even if it was just deep down, it was a question I would probably never get an answer to, but that was all right with me since I knew what I was feeling. Earth was home. It didn't matter that I didn't visit for years, and I already knew that my path would lead me to places far away from there. The best analogy I could find was to compare Earth to the home of one's parents. There would come a day when you left your parents' home to go out into the world, but you would always know there was a home you could come back to. I unconsciously clenched my hands as I swore to my safe to keep Earth safe so that humanity would always have a home it could come back to. After I gave my pilot the go-ahead and he started the descent, I saw that the first step in keeping Earth safe was already underway. A grid of 6 ODPs with another 7th in construction spanned around the horizontal axis of the planet. The initial idea was that Earth would get 14 ODPs in total, placed around the horizontal and vertical axes of Earth. This way, there would be no angle an attacker could use without running into a defense that would obliterate most starships in a few shots. Coupled with the fact that the ODPs had the ability to rotate, every enemy fleet attacking Earth would have to go up against at least half of the ODP grid. It would take a long time until the plans were realized, and I knew that they wouldn't be finished by the time the Reapers were supposed to arrive in the galaxy, but it would hopefully give them a bloody nose or hold them back long enough to evacuate more people. When that thought crossed my mind, I grimaced. Earth was my home, but I was already giving it up. Logic dictated that it would happen. Even if future events wouldn't play out like in the games, I knew that the Reapers would attack Earth and succeed. Their technological superiority and their numbers guaranteed it. Besides, the tactical and psychological advantages of attacking the homeworld of a species were too great to ignore them in favor of anything else. It would either demoralize a species or goad them into ill-considered actions. Both were very helpful in any sort of fight. Yet I couldn't just abandon my home planet. It didn't matter if it was doomed to be invaded, and that every credit I put into its defense could be better used in another place. It was completely illogical, but since when was being human logical? The enemies coming from beyond the Milky Way were machines, beings of logic, so perhaps being illogical was the way forward. I had banished the thought from my mind at the time, but keeping it in the back for the possibility it would prove itself useful. After we entered Earth's atmosphere, I took a shuttle toward James's home and arrived a few minutes before the time we agreed on. James greeted me with open arms and enthusiastically introduced me to his wife. The dinner went well, and I have to say that James's wife was an excellent cook. Her roast was wonderful, and I didn't just say that because it had been a long time since I had a home-cooked meal. Afterward, James and I retired to his study, where he gave me an overview of the current situation and operations of the Alliance. He concentrated more on the militaristic side, but that was to be expected, in my opinion. I couldn't help but laugh when he told me that in trying to prove the alliance's worth as an able defense partner, the current president allowed the Board of Admiralty to circumvent the council completely and open talks with the Turian hierarchy directly. Every time Anita brought up our willingness to participate in the border patrol efforts of the hierarchy, the council responded with indifference, and that while our offer was appreciated, it was unnecessary as the current border patrol fleets were sufficient. If I had been there in person, I wouldn't have been able to hold back a scoff at the response. It was a load of crap, and everyone who looked into the situation a bit more deeply could see it as well. The fleets put under the Citadel Council were stretched thin, and most of them were placed to protect the interests of the Council. The colonies bordering the Attican Traverse or the Terminus system, no matter the species, were disastrously underdefended, and the Turian hierarchy took it upon itself to defend these colonies as it did its own. This led to the Asari and Salarian slowly reducing their contribution to the Citadel fleets, and by now the Turian contribution to the Citadel fleets almost equaled those of the Asari and Salarians combined. If one took into account the support coming from the hierarchy directly, the ratio shifted dramatically in the Turians' favor. Of course, calling it a favor would be wrong. After all, it led to the Turian fleets being stretched thin, and they couldn't even keep up with their duties inside their own territory. Furthermore, thanks to the long period of peace the galaxy enjoyed, the Council, or better said the Asari and Salarians, were unwilling to grant the hierarchy their approval to put more fleets into active service. Even the Turian counselor was careful not to rock the boat, which didn't mean much since the current one was a pushover and was trying to consolidate more power for himself than to help his government on the galactic stage. Yet, even if the Council showed disapproval, the hierarchy wasn't going to stop building up its forces. It just didn't do so aggressively. And when the offer from the Board of Admiralty to work together in matters of border defense came through official channels, some Turian admirals instantly agreed to meet. James told me, as he was one of the few admirals invited, the meeting went well. While he was annoyed at the amount of politicking that went on, he couldn't disagree that it would help the Alliance to become more active in galactic affairs. To cut a long story short, it was agreed upon that for the next 3 years, Alliance frigates and cruisers would be attached to the existing border patrol fleets of the Turians. The idea behind this action was to give the Alliance officers time to learn how the Turians operated, to ensure that in the future, operations between the two militaries would run smoothly. The Alliance officers would be subordinate to the Turian commander of the fleet they were attached to for the time of their deployment, but would be under no obligation to follow any order that wasn't given concerning their border patrol duties. Should conflicts arise from that, then a board of Turian and Alliance officers would review the case and punish the party guilty of wrongdoing. Furthermore, if the exchange program, as Wright called it, proved itself to be successful after 1.5 years, then a number of Turian officers would be sent to take part in the border patrol fleets of the Alliance under the same circumstances. The reason why there was a time discrepancy between sending Alliance and Turian officers was that the Alliance wanted to create a sentiment of trust between the two governments. The Turian hierarchy protected the borders of Citadel space for centuries before humans even left Earth. Their pride would get in the way if they ever thought we saw ourselves as their equals, when we, in their minds, just discovered that the galaxy was a much bigger place than we previously thought. Because of that, the Alliance decided to go into the meeting with the image of someone willing to learn from a more experienced person. It worked, and the Turians decided to magnanimously accept our readiness to learn from them. The fact that if they decided to forego sending officers to our patrol fleets would give us a bigger advantage because we would know how the Turian patrol fleets operated and how to counter them in the event of war between our government didn't seem to register to them. Perhaps there would be a Turian admiral or general who thought about that and pressed for officers to be sent to our side. And if that happened, it would paint a picture of cooperation to the galaxy, and such a picture was a powerful tool. In the end, the Alliance would only benefit from the exchange program. Wright also told me that plans were already made to further the cooperation between the two militaries through war games if the program proved successful. These war games would pit Turians against humans to test the limits and weaknesses of their respective combat doctrines, and teams consisting of humans and Turians against each other to test their compatibility and work out any edges. Hopefully, their plans would work because the Alliance would need an ally like the hierarchy in the coming years. While most of the things James told me were good, there were also some troubling signs. Despite the best efforts of the AIS, the political situation inside the Batarian hegemony seemed to have calmed down over the last years. And with this calm came an increase in pirate and slaver attacks on Alliance territory. Of course, the hegemony continued to disavow their involvement, even if nobody believed their word. The number of Batarians participating in the attacks was too great to not be sanctioned by them. Yet without concrete evidence, the Council was unwilling to do anything, especially with the Batarian ambassador making a nuisance of himself. He even managed to get the testimony of a captured Batarian captain dismissed, calling it a sham and an attempt of the Alliance to weaken the hegemony. It shouldn't have worked, but he insisted that a task force of the Council investigated the claims of Batarian involvement in the recent attacks. James, who heard from Anita, told me that the Council was ready to make a ruling in the Alliance's favor before the Batarian ambassador called for the task force, taking the testimony the AIS produced for what it was, the truth. But every member of the Citadel had the right to call for a Council investigation before any binding ruling that would lead to severe implications for that member. The hands of the Council were tied, and thus they sent the task force, waiting for their report before they took any action. And lo and behold, the task force never encountered a single Batarian pirate or slaver during their 2-month investigation. Just pirates of every other species. Their report concluded that the pirates and slavers were from the Terminus systems and that they didn't find anything connecting the attacks to the Batarian hegemony. From what Anita told James, the Batarian ambassador strutted around the Presidium like he owned it after the Council had no choice but to dismiss the testimony as false. Of course, the Alliance's accusations subsequently got dismissed as well. Thankfully, since the Council knew what probably happened and didn't want the Alliance to be pushed into a corner, they called the false testimony an act of revenge by a Batarian with a grudge towards the hegemony who saw his capture by the Alliance as his chance to get back at it. Ever since then, the tension at the border between the Alliance and the hegemony was rising steadily, and it was just a matter of time until something happened that would explode the powder keg. The top brass of the Alliance military was already planning and looking for a target that would have the most impact during the time between the initial event and the moment the Council intervened. It was universally decided that the Alliance wouldn't be the initiator of such an event to keep the morale high ground, but the retaliation would be swift and show the hegemony that the Alliance wouldn't be merciful if they dared to try again. It wouldn't escalate into a full-blown war, as the Council would want to prevent such an event, a fact that I was truly grateful for. While the Alliance was strong and its position in the galaxy became better and better with every passing week, its strength wasn't nearly enough to contend with the Batarian hegemony if things got really heated, at least without an ally to back them. That was another reason why I hoped that the program James told me about would be successful. If a number of Turian officers were present during the inevitable attack on one of our colonies, or at least during the aftermath, it wouldn't be hard to get Turian support. Even if they wouldn't send actual troops to participate in the counterattack, then the Alliance could at least be sure of their support when the matter came before the Council. Their sense of righteousness would demand no less. James and I continued to talk about several more things concerning the Alliance, but nothing that had the potential to change the current power structure. After I said goodbye to James and his wife, I spent the night in a hotel before I left Earth the next late afternoon for my next destination. I would have loved to stay for a few more days, but since I didn't know how much I missed being on Earth, I packed my schedule so full that there was not enough time to do so. Even the morning and midday I spent there was already a delay in my timetable, but I just couldn't help myself. My next destination was Reach, where I would meet up with Takahashi to witness the first attempt to jump into FTL with a frigate that was equipped with a 3 ESO core drive. All previous tests were just hypothetical, but they showed promising results. If all went well during the attempt, then the next thing was to test its capability to use the relays. And just like with the FTL jump, the theoretical deliberations told the scientists that the ship would be able to do it without any damage to the ship or its crew. After that, the only thing left would be to adapt the DR drive to the multi-core technology, which would take another year or so. At least that was what Takahashi promised me. So if everything went according to plan, then the construction of the first ruler-class ship would begin in 2175. With the need to keep everything secret, well, as much as we could keep it secret with thousands of people working on it, the construction would take around 5 to 7 years, and I was generous with that time estimation. A ruler class was like a black hole in regard to the resources it needed, and I hoped it would be like one when it came to crushing the obstacles in its path. Yet that would depend on the success of Takahashi's and Barbara's tests with the multi-core technology and the adaptation of the DR drive to it. Until then, I wouldn't even think of greenlighting the construction. It would cost me millions if the combination of multiple ESO cores in the DR drive proved to be impossible. That was why I took the opportunity to see the first field test of the multi-core tech and traveled to Reach. I wanted to see humanity's progress in trying to stand on the same level as the other galactic civilizations. Still, when I made my plans, there had been enough time to travel from Earth to Reach to visit Arcturus Station in between. That was the real reason why I left Earth so early. The appointments I made with several people on Arcturus weren't something I was willing to delay just to indulge myself, no matter how much I wanted to. Furthermore, some of those meetings would help me conclude my business on Ilium sooner, and thus would enable me to leave the planet in the hands of a trusted subordinate. Besides, Arcturus was on the way to Reach. Not visiting the space station would be idiocy. I would have to travel there at one point to take care of some business, and to not take the opportunity of doing so when I was already close by would be gross mismanagement of my time. While Arcturus Station did not take my breath away like Earth did when I arrived, it still left me with a feeling of satisfaction. After all, my company was the one responsible for its construction. After years of non-stop work, Arcturus wasn't just the political capital of the Alliance in one of its military centers. The station had become a city in space. It wasn't nearly as grand as the Citadel, but it didn't lose in matters of impact. During my time on the Citadel, I overheard a discussion between an Asari and a human concerning Arcturus. The Asari tried to disparage our achievement of creating a smaller copy of the Citadel for our own use by saying that anything humanity created would always be less than the splendor of the Citadel. She spoke with the by now expected arrogance of a member of the oldest spacefaring species in the current galaxy. Yet she had no better answer than to praise the Citadel again when the human asked her if the Asari ever built anything similar to it. I couldn't hold back a smirk when I heard the human remarking that the Citadel didn't count since the Asari merely found it floating in space, abandoned by its former owners, and didn't build it themselves. In essence, the human told her that the Asari were trying to take credit for something another did, and that they never even attempted to recreate it. The argument was over after that comment, but the human was the definitive winner of it, especially after the Asari walked away with a huff. Besides, the construction of Arcturus Station may be done, but I was sure that there were already plans to further expand the station. If the Reapers didn't destroy it, I would love to see how the space station looked in 50 years. In my mind, Arcturus was a project that would never be completely finished. There would always be more that could be added or expanded on. If one thought about it, the station was a good representation of humanity's mindset. Still, I didn't travel to Arcturus to watch the station float around the emptiness of space. I had business to conduct. My pilot landed in the hangar that was reserved for my use since I didn't want to deal with the crowds at the public terminals. The hangar could easily hold 2 or 3 ships as long as they weren't too big, and since the only ships using it were of the personal transport variety, it hadn't been a problem in all the time I paid the rent for the hangar. I could have rented a bigger hangar, but what use would I have for one? The location was close to the small Ad Astra office building on Arcturus, and every ship bringing in materials for construction could use the commercial port on the other side of the station. After we landed, I was greeted by one of my employees who asked if I would like to relax in the room they prepared for me, or if I wanted to check in with our branch office first. I disregarded both options and told him that he was to call our lawyer here on Arcturus and tell him that I was going to visit his office. Normally, I would invite the lawyers from Hendrickson and Derber to meet me in my offices, or at least give them enough time to prepare themselves for my arrival. But the fact that those appointments were the reason why I couldn't stay for another day on Earth made me a bit petty. It was juvenile, but I didn't care. If one got power, then one should use it sometimes for petty reasons, as long as nobody got hurt by it. It was fun seeing people run around like headless chickens whenever I said something they didn't expect, and they tried to accommodate me. And such a scene greeted me when I stepped into the offices of Hendrickson and Durber. The lobby on the ground floor was a picture of calmness, projecting a strong image to everyone who walked by, and it showed nothing of the hecticness that happened on the first floor, where I was going to meet with the two heads of the law firm. The moment I stepped out of the elevator was like taking a step into the dreaded battlefield of a Black Friday sale. Dozens of people running around with towering mountains of paper in their hands, orders shouted across the floor, and for the first few seconds, nobody noticed my arrival, too focused on their work to take a moment to look around. That was truly funny. They were rushing to prepare for me, but didn't notice I was already there. When the first person noticed me, she just stopped, like a deer caught by headlights. And from there, it was like a ripple effect. More and more people started to notice me, and all the noise that had permeated the office disappeared. Into the ensuing silence, I just raised an eyebrow and said, "Don't mind me. Continue as you were. I'll find the way myself." Thankfully, my words helped them to leave their state of shock, and they continued with their work, only in a much more tempered way. A man came my way and introduced himself as Mrs. Durber's secretary and asked me to follow him toward the meeting room Mrs. Durber and Mr. Hendrickson prepared. He led me into a meeting room at the other end of the office and asked me to wait inside until Hendrickson and Durber arrived. I helped myself to the coffee that was placed on a small side table, and as I took the first sip, the door opened and the two people I wanted to see entered the room. To my appreciation, the usual exchange of niceties and general questions about the current state of being was over quick, and we proceeded to the reason I wanted to meet with them. It wasn't something world-moving. I just wanted to go over the details of what could happen if my deal with Nisko Ron, where I would buy company shares with his money, came to light, the consequences, the ramifications, and the legal trouble. I wanted to know as much as I could. Furthermore, I wanted the two lawyers to be prepared to run interference if my dealings ever came to light and not caught unaware. The moment it happened, the two lawyers would have their work cut out for them, but thankfully, they were at the center of the political scene of the alliance, and they were trustworthy enough to be informed about my dealings and, maybe even more important, in possession of a part of my little black book. Every favor I owned was written down on those pages, and more importantly, what I did to get that favor. The pages Hendrickson and Durber had access to were only about politicians, but that would be enough to mitigate any damage to my image. In addition to that, the other law firms my company employed would help them by working from different angles. The exact number of law firms my company employed eluded me, and personally, I had no desire to rectify that. I knew that the number was somewhere between 20 and 100, but if one asked me to recount their names, I would only be able to name half a dozen, at most. One law firm at every important place I visited: Earth, Arcturus, Terra Nova, the Citadel, Ilium, and, well, at least I could remember 5 of them. Most of the other law firms were used for local disputes or as a delay technique, so it was excusable to not remember their names. The delay technique was the brainchild of a member of my administrative department after he had observed how long it took to take action if something happened in star systems further away. While the communication and network made great improvements in the last few years, there was still some delay if the importance of the sender or recipient wasn't high enough to warrant special treatment from the companies operating the network. Of course, the importance was determined by the contract negotiated with them, and that meant how much you paid them for their services. And small-time law firms sadly only used one of the standard contracts that didn't rank high on their list as something important. Sadly, this method only worked in Alliance territory since its laws stated that every participating party had to be informed and confirm that the information arrived before any action could be taken, at least as long as the actions were legal. So if one put up a distant law firm as the main contractor and added a close one as CC, then one could use the extra time to prepare for one's opponent's actions before they could legally enact them. The Citadel's laws didn't have that addendum, so the method was less useful when dealing with people outside the Alliance. Furthermore, there was a push in the Alliance Parliament to bring out laws more in line with those of the Citadel to make it easier to deal with the other species governments. And the law my company was used would be among the ones that would be changed. It wasn't that effective of a method anyway, Besides, downsizing the number of law firms my company employed would save a lot of money. In the end, the meeting between me and my lawyers didn't take too long, only a little more than 2 hours. We spoke about possible ramifications and their counters, put a plan in place that could be activated whenever needed, and made sure that when Nisko Ron could take control of his investments legally, the transition would be as smooth as possible. The last point was more of a ploy to get Nisko Ron to trust in me than anything else. I wanted to show him something that would assuage his worries and convince him that I was taking our deal and my admittance to the Circle seriously. The rules and ways of the Circle seemed to be something important to him, and my showing that I was trying to live by them would put me on his good side. Well, not that the transition would ever happen in the first place. By the time it would be possible, I wanted my dealings with the Circle to be over and done with, and the other members either in positions where they would never be able to move against me or dead. Personally, I leaned toward the latter. It was more of a clear cut and without any loose ends that could bite me in the ass down the road. The other members of the Circle didn't strike me as the type of people who would be stopped by seemingly powerless positions. They would crawl out of the hole I would throw them in and do everything in their power to see me brought low. Truly, it would be better for me if I didn't allow this possible scenario in the first place. The following 2 days I spent on Arcturus were a sequence of updates about my company's projects and meetings with people that were somewhat important in the political scene. A promise to support someone during the next election on this or that planet, a donation to a charity I never heard of before, posing for pictures that would appear in some magazine. It was tedious, really tedious, but that's the life I choose, and when I became ambassador and hopefully later on counselor, those things would happen even more frequently. Nonetheless, I was grateful for the silence and comfort of my ship when we left Arcturus to meet up with the Alliance cruiser Copenhagen. The Copenhagen would transport us into the Olympus system since my personal ship didn't possess a DR drive. At least, this one didn't. Well, officially, none of the ships that belonged to me personally possessed a DR drive, but that was just on paper. After all, how many ships that were in private hands were just like they should be on paper? Everybody liked to tinker a bit, and if my personal property was a bit more modified than others, what can I say? It's the privilege of the rich. I spent most of my time on the Copenhagen, cooped up on my ship after I went to meet up with the ship's captain and made some small talk with the officers on the bridge. The travel didn't take long, and I had no desire to just walk around the cruiser aimlessly. I visited enough ships of the same make to almost find my way with eyes closed, so there wasn't anything that interested me. Okay, that was a lie. I wouldn't be able to find my way around with my eyes closed. But it was true that I knew the ship in and out. The general blueprints of any military ship didn't change too much from one generation to the next, and the changes to the layout were so minuscule they could be called non-existent. If one walked through a cruiser from 10 to 15 years ago and knew, for example, where to find the sleeping berth of the engineers, then that somebody would find it in the same amount of time in a cruiser fresh out of the dry dock. It was designed this way so that whenever a soldier changed ships or had to operate on a ship that wasn't his, could find his way to every location without having to think or search where it was. Of course, some argued that this was more of a disadvantage than an advantage, since everybody with less than honorable intentions could learn about the interior of an up-to-date cruiser with the help of an already decommissioned ship. The location of the reactor, possible choke points and ambush sites, and other targets of interest. But those concerns could be dismissed in my opinion. First of all, the internal security features of every ship, be it a frigate, cruiser, or dreadnought, were always different from generation to generation and were one of the first things to be removed when the ship left service. Additional blast doors were placed at different locations. There were hidey holes hidden in walls for soldiers to ambush enemy boarding parties from behind, and don't get me started on the turrets installed into the ceiling. I've seen enough simulated boarding operations to know that taking over any Alliance ship would be a monumental task, and that didn't take into account the steer stubbornness of the Alliance defenders. There had been more than one ship sent back into the dry docks for repairs after its interior had been damaged during a lively training session. The face of the ship's captain must have been a sight to see when he could do nothing but watch as his crew's training turned destructive, especially when he had to explain the costs of the repairs to his superiors. The time between getting on the Copenhagen and arriving at Reach went over in a flash, and I was asked to board a shuttle that would bring me directly to the testing site. The place from where the test would be observed was another cruiser, but I couldn't recall its name. I was probably distracted when someone told me, and I didn't think to ask again. After all, the cruiser's name was unimportant in the end. Really, the only important thing about the second cruiser was that its scanning and observation equipment had been improved with tech directly out of the labs down on Reach, and those would be carted back there the moment the tests were over. I didn't even take 5 steps off the shuttle before a lieutenant walked over and bid me to follow him to the observation deck, where the rest of the experiment observers were. The walk was a short one, and the lieutenant took his leave at the door to continue with his tasks. After I entered, I noticed how crowded the observation deck was, and that among all those present, I only recognized around a dozen faces and knew even less of them personally. Most of the people present were members of the Alliance military, with a fairly high rank, but there were also 1 or 2 government officials. One of them was, I believe, the personal assistant of the current Minister of Defense. Apparently, the minister herself wanted to come, but an emergency meeting of some kind had been sprung on her, and she couldn't get away to observe the test. As my eyes went over the assembled crowd, I noticed 2 people who were a part of it, but somehow still by themselves, and I knew that those 2 were representatives of the AIS. But the only people I had any interest in were standing at the other end of the room, close to the window, looking out into the deep space. I made my way toward Barbara and Takahashi, and I didn't even have to try to get around the rest of the people. Every person standing in my way took a step back or forward so that they wouldn't impede me. Even the vice admirals present did it, and while I was thankful for it, I couldn't help but question the reason behind it. At the moment, I didn't know it, but somehow the story of what happened to the military officers that tried to get in my way by trying to control my actions or stealing from me for a superficial reason as a defense got told over and over again until I became a sort of boogeyman to many military officers. I even got a saying about me: if you don't want your career to end ingloriously, then don't piss off Denebrin. Come on, I wasn't that bad, was I? I mean, I may have been responsible for some careers to end prematurely, or ending up in positions that were nothing more than fancy titles with no power and unrewarding work. But hey, they deserved it. That doesn't mean I would do it to every person who stepped on my toes once. Well, if I was in a particular mood, I would threaten to do this, but I wouldn't go through with it for something so minor. Anyway, I met up with Barbara and Takahashi. The latter was very excited to see me again in person after so long and started to talk rapidly about the coming experiment, his work before that, and what success would mean for every project he worked on. It was hard to follow him whenever he got so excited, but my experience with it helped me understand the key points he was making. If the multi-core technology proved itself stable enough for FTL jumps without the help of a mass relay, then it would be a clear indicator that relay jumps were in the range of the possible too, and that the possible adjustments for it were at best minimal. At worst, it would just take another month, especially if Barbara and Takahashi concentrated on the project and didn't let themselves be distracted by their other experiments. I had to intervene and steer the conversation in another direction when Barbara commented that it would be impossible for Takahashi, as he had in her mind the attention span of a child on too much sugar. Thankfully, my diversion of asking about his efforts in designing the ruler-class prototype staved off the bickering between Takahashi and Barbara, and I got to know how much progress was made. And the progress was staggering. The initial blueprints were already finished, and only the exact specifications for the multi-cores were needed to go into the next phase. The specifications were important because Takahashi had to know how far the distance between the EZO cores had to be so that the cores worked effectively and did not inhibit each other. Furthermore, the rest of the different rooms of the ship had to be placed in such a way that there was enough room to shield the chambers of the cores from outside interference. The fact that there had been no testing in combination with the DR drive yet was another factor that would have an impact on the final result of the blueprints. If one heard it like this, it didn't seem like the blueprints were anywhere close to being finished, and they would be right. It would still take a lot of time, but at least one part of the ship, the outer circle, was finalized on paper. To understand what I mean, one needed to know that the design of the ships was twofold: an inner and an outer part. The inner part would house everything that would be essential to run the ship, for example, the drive, the reactors, and the isocores. In essence, one could say the inner circle was a ship unto itself, while the outer circle was everything else. From crew quarters to the hangar bays and laboratories, everything that didn't concern the actual running of the ship would be placed there. The inner and outer parts were going to be separated by metal plates half as thick as the hull of the ship, which was already thicker than those of any other ship in the Alliance's fleet. Through this, the essential parts of the ship would be much better protected from any attack, and I believed even a Reaper would have problems destroying the ship in one go. So while the plans for the ship were far from finished, and since the inner parts still had to be designed, the outer circle was almost finished. Even the weapons were already taken into account, although they were still subject to change, and would probably be the last thing to be constructed. The speed of the development of new weapons and defensive measures was still high, thanks to our efforts in trying to catch up with the rest of the galaxy. About the real reason why I was in the Olympus system in the first place, the first FTL jump was a huge success, if one could call not blowing up in 1,000 pieces a huge success. From our position, we couldn't see more than the test ship suddenly appearing before our eyes and the announcement of the test ship's captain that all systems were working as they should. While Barbara and Takahashi were excited as everyone else that the first test was successful, I had the suspicion they didn't want to watch the event from the observation deck, but from the place where the advanced equipment was to see the scanning results in real time. Instead, they would have to be content with the records. After the experiment was over and I said goodbye to Barbara and Takahashi, who wanted to see the accumulated data, I spent some more time talking to the other people, or at least those who came to me. In truth, I wanted to talk a bit more to Takahashi since he was the only person around. I didn't have to look out for what was said. The whole political talk and double-speaking could get annoying after a while. Besides, whatever I was going to talk over with Takahashi would be miles more interesting than anything anyone here could tell me. Perhaps I should think about taking a month off after I finished up on Ilium. Now that I thought about it, I don't remember ever taking even a short vacation in the last 10 or 20 years. It would probably do me some good to just relax, especially if the coming years became as hectic as I feared they would be. Fortunately, the meet and greet didn't take long, and I could leave unobstructed. Coming to Reach just to watch an experiment, something that didn't even take longer than 3 hours, seemed like a waste of time to me. Yet it was an event that I couldn't miss. It was one of these you-have-to-be-seen events that everyone with a high enough position had to go to if nothing equally important happened at the same time. Thankfully, the next station of my trip, the Citadel, was by far more interesting. The opportunities presented were grandiose, and the update I got about my plans had me in high spirits for quite a while. Of course, the first thing I did on the Citadel was visit my branch office where my second-in-command told me that the two people arriving at the restaurant stopped any other thought in my mind in an effort to put my complete focus on them. I watched how the waiter escorted them to a table not that far from mine, but far enough that they didn't notice my presence immediately. They ordered their meals and drinks quickly, probably already knowing what they wanted to eat before they stepped inside. I discreetly activated my Omni tool to pull up a few messages I wrote before I arrived so that they could be sent instantly if I needed to. If I had learned anything about tactics and strategies from Andrew and James, then it was to prepare your arsenal before you went to battle. Well, this wouldn't be a true battle anyway, not even one of wits. With the things I prepared beforehand, I stacked the deck in my favor so much that it would be more akin to a one-sided slaughter. On the other hand, what would come after the slaughter was something I had to touch more delicately. After all, if everything went right, then I would strengthen my position within the circle of Alamina considerably. The only question remaining was, should I let the Turian and Asari enjoy the main course before I made my entrance, or would the entree be enough? Chapter 30. July 27, 2173, 2046, Ilium Tassali System, Nos Astra Sayola Restaurant. I decided to wait until they finished with their main course. Anything else would have been rude, in my opinion, And it definitely had nothing to do with the piece of cake I ordered as dessert, even if that cake was one of the specialties of the restaurant. Furthermore, it gave me time to think about my plan once again, adjust certain aspects, and cover possible scenarios. I didn't want to appear too forceful and flaunt my power. That was something that had become my go-to response in the last few years, and was something I tried to change about myself. During my time on the Citadel, someone pointed out to me that I focused too much value on raw power than I ever did before, and I cursed myself for not noticing it. Years ago, I scolded others for thinking like that, and now I was doing it myself. How embarrassing. Yet now that the problem, and it was a problem, got pointed out to me, I was trying to correct my thinking. Perhaps I got used to the power I wielded at my fingertips. There's nothing more addictive than to know that a single word of yours can change the life of another person, and that a single order can affect thousands of people. I took a deep breath to center myself. Searching for a reason could wait for a bit longer. I was here to further my agenda, not to reflect on the changes that happened to me over the years. Besides, if started with that, I would have to send out more than a few orders to my associates and tell them about a few changes that would happen in the coming months. My eyes found the table where the person I wanted to speak with was, and I saw that a waiter was busy clearing the table of the leftovers from the main course. The Asari and the Turian browsed the menu the waiter gave them for dessert, but didn't look like they were doing so enthusiastically. It seemed like their dinner didn't go well, and they were just keeping up airs for those around them. That was good and bad for me, depending on their individual moods. My target would probably be annoyed but grateful for my sudden appearance. Probably thankful for the surprising distraction. Nobody liked to continue with a dinner date when it became awkward or stilted. The appendage could react in two different ways. On the one hand, the appendage could react the same way as my target and use the situation to politely leave. That was the outcome I favored. Yet from what I knew, the second outcome was much more likely than the first. A rising temper, antagonism, insults about my species, and some empty threats to see me dead. Essentially the loud barking of a dog with no bite. Still, just because I knew what was probably going to happen and was prepared for it, didn't mean I was going to like having to deal with it. Well, no time like the present, and I had to leave my table at some point, right? I was sure there were already people waiting for it. The food was, after all, amazing. I waved a waiter over to pay my check, and after paying, stood up to make my way over to my target's table. A casual smile appeared on my face. It was important to seem relaxed when one went into a situation that could escalate. Staying calm, even when someone started to threaten you, made it seem like you had absolute control of the situation. And that was necessary when dealing with someone losing their temper, or else they could act on their impulses and make everything worse than it had to be. Making short-sighted decisions while angry was sadly not a trait confined to humans. As I walked over, I had to stop a snort from coming out when I thought about my initial plan of seemingly trying to leave the restaurant just to, coincidentally, walk past their table. That I even had the idea to make it look like pure happenstance that I met them was enough to make me cringe inwardly. It would have looked so staged that it could have happened in a low-budget soap opera that runs around midday, especially if I had to reveal some of my preparations if the add-on got uppity. After all, why should I prepare anything if it was a coincidence meeting them in the first place? When I got close to the table, I made sure to appear in the field of vision of my target first. Her eyes widened a fraction when she saw me, but any indication of surprise faded from her face moments later and was replaced by a calm but inviting smile. "Miss Detiovi, it's nice to see you again," I greeted, focusing on her while ignoring her company. "Mr. Dennebrand, how wonderful to meet you here. But I can't help but ask for your reason for being here," she responded kindly. I wasn't taken in by her false tone. The true meaning behind her words was a lot closer to simply asking me what I wanted than anything. But since we were in a public setting, she had to follow common courtesy and ask politely. "I saw you entering the restaurant earlier and thought it would be polite to say hello. And since you, just like I, finished with the main course, I thought it was the right time to do so." "That is very kind of you, Mr. Dennebrand," Detiovi said while her eyes looked into mine, searching for the real reason I approached her in this setting. But before I could say anything leading in that direction, the Turian, who was her company for the evening, didn't want to stay silent any longer and interrupted our conversation rudely. "I would prefer you go on your way, now that you said hello. We were having a nice dinner until you appeared." I saw Dityovi rolling her eyes at the comment, and I also raised an eyebrow at it. Either he was delusional if he called their dinner nice, or it was a nice dinner for him. If the latter one was true, then I didn't want to know what he considered a catastrophic dinner. Perhaps if his dinner date tried to kill him? Slowly I turned my head to him, my smile fixed on my face, and looked at the Turian's face, trying to ascertain his mood. Turian faces were always harder to read, their physiology too different from those of humans. So my experience in reading people's faces wouldn't be able to help me as much as it did with Asari and Solarians. Those two species showed their moods a lot more like humans, and if one knew what to look for, one could find traces of them in their faces. Still, one didn't have to be an expert in reading Turian faces to realize that Turawaran in front of me wasn't in the best of moods. Narrowed eyes, his mandibles pressed together. If that Turian wasn't annoyed and angry, then I would donate my whole fortune to Cerberus. Any notion that he would just politely leave now that he had an out disappeared from my mind. He was looking for a confrontation to give his frustrations an outlet. Perhaps he wasn't as ignorant as I first thought. Rather, he knew how well their dinner went and now tried to make himself feel better by confronting me. That I was a human made the situation even better in his mind. He wasn't the most open-minded person on Ilium in regards to newcomers on the galactic stage, or better said, any species not on the council. I had hoped that the public setting would stop him from his usual tendencies, especially when his date for the evening was the Asari running some of the most popular news companies on Ilium. If she wanted, she could destroy his reputation in a single week. Yet a quick glance to the side showed me that she had no intention of involving herself. It was more likely that she wanted to enjoy the coming show if I interpreted the small smile she tried to hide by taking a sip of her wine correctly. "Ah, Mr. Vertorios," I said, "a pleasure to meet you as well." Staying polite in the face of animosity was always a good idea, especially in a public setting. It took your opposite off guard because most expect you to respond with hostility. Furthermore, unless your opposite was set on their path, they would tone down their aggression so they wouldn't feel like an idiot by continuing with it. The public setting helped in this regard because nobody liked to appear lesser than the other person when dozens of eyes were directed at them. And starting a fight for the heck of it was definitely something the public looked down upon, as long as the public wasn't consisting of only Krogans. Yet from Vertorio's narrowing eyes, I knew that he had no intention of calming down to have a polite conversation. "And how do you know my name?" he asked grindingly. "I make it a habit to know the names, occupations, and associates of the players here on Ilium," I answered, skirting somewhat around the truth. While my words could be interpreted as a compliment, calling Vertorios a player, it wasn't what I wanted to say. Well, Vertorios was a player. His shipping company may be small and mostly used to ferry goods for his underworld partners, but he had enough money and influence to be called one. However, the league he was playing in was far beneath mine and Dityovi's. So far beneath ours that I initially asked myself why she even agreed to this dinner. Finding out that it was a donation to one of her charities and that she was obligated to invite him to dinner as thanks were enough to assuage my worries that I could annoy her by preventing one of her plans from coming to fruition. The only reason Vertorios appeared on my radar was this dinner invitation, else I wouldn't have looked up his name in the first place. And damn, it didn't take my analysts even 2 days to find enough to threaten him into obedience. And only the fact that he was a small fish kept him from Ilium's prisons. He wasn't even important enough in the grand picture that the most corrupt officials would take his bribes. Their equally corrupt rivals would pounce on it without hesitation to further their goals. Bribes were quite an interesting topic on Ilium. As long as you were one of the big players and were discreet, the topic would never appear in the eye of the public or in any court of law. Revealing that an official took bribes also meant revealing from whom they took them, and that was a big no-no for most. After all, you had to be prepared to go against a billion credit company just to oust a rival. There were a dozen easier ways to do so than antagonize someone much more powerful than you. The only time this happens was when two companies were going against each other, and while that wasn't unusual, They liked to keep it between them. All in all, nobody was willing to stick out their neck for a small-time player like Vertorios when there were bribes available without consequences. Sadly, he wasn't the kind of person who understood this. "As you should, human," he smirked. Did I mention that he looked down on humans? So much that he probably didn't even know who I was. Really, talk about not having any sense of danger. I felt how my lips pressed together for a moment before my relaxed smile returned. Even if his arrogant attitude got on my nerves, I couldn't allow myself to be swept up by his flow. Right now wasn't the time to take shots at his ego. Besides, Vertorios would lose much more if he continued with his actions than the illusion of superiority. I looked him into his eyes a moment longer before turning back to Didiovi and saying, "I just wanted to ask if it would be possible to arrange a meeting in the coming days. My time away from Ilium was quite productive, and while I was on the Citadel, I came across an opportunity that should be of some interest to you." Didiovi looked at me cautiously, yet with a glint of interest in her eyes. Her caution was understandable. Circle meetings were the only time we interacted with each other, and even then those meetings were less of a social gathering than a business meeting. Not to mention they happened only irregularly, so there wasn't often an opportunity to talk in the first place. Furthermore, my rise to the top of the business world here on Ilium had been quite fast and brutal for anyone in my way. While such stellar ascents were unusual in human society, they were nothing extraordinary. The same couldn't be said for a society of beings that lived for 1,000 years. No Asari had ever accomplished something like that before their first century. They were used to slow and steady ascents through the ranks and looked at everyone who seemingly rushed to the top with suspicion. Nevertheless, my position as a member of the Circle awarded me with some measure of trust. The same amount of trust one would give a business partner that would think about his own profit first and foremost. Enough to get to the table, but not enough to not be looked at without suspicion. Didiovi opened her mouth to reply, but before she could get any word out, Vertorios interrupted once again, angrier than before. "Did you just try to dismiss me, human?" Vertorios growled. With the tone he spat out the word human, he nearly convinced me that it wasn't the term for my species, but an insult that had been a candidate for most offensive word of the year. "I didn't dismiss you, Mr. Vertorios. It's just that I have some matters that I would like to discuss with Miss Didiovi." I saw no reason to delay telling her this. "After all, I'm sure she would like to proceed with the dinner," I said, my head turning only slightly into Vertorios' direction so I could see him. "The cake they offer is truly exquisite." Those last words were directed at Didiovi, and an amused smile flitted over her face. She knew what I was doing, and she thought it funny. I was glad that I didn't misjudge her personality, or this could have blown up in my face. After all, she was someone who liked tearing down others or watching it happen in front of her. "I'm not someone you should ignore," said Vertorios, his tone dropping down to a threatening growl. "I can make your life very difficult if I want to. There are enough people who owe me a favor and would gladly take the opportunity to get in my good graces." I couldn't help the amused smile that appeared on my face as he said those words. The smile stayed on my face as I turned back to him, angering him even more when he saw it, believing that I was mocking him. Well, in my defense, I wasn't truly mocking him, at least not at that moment. I was more amused by his threat than anything. Some of the people he spoke about would jump to do him a favor, but most of them would probably sever any connection between them. They were smart enough to know that by making a move against me, Vertorios would become a sinking ship. "I find that hard to believe," I replied, and my amusement bled into my tone. "If it comes to the point where you have to call in favors, it won't be because you want them to work against me, but because you will need every shred of help you can get." I don't know if it was my words or the absolute calm I delivered them with that pushed him over the edge, but the next moment Vertorios' chair hit the floor with a resounding bang, and his face was only a few centimeters apart from mine. "I won't be threatened by some lowly human," he spat, and some spittle flew from his mouth and hit my face. "If you don't fuck off now, I'll beat you to death right here, right now." Really, I knew that he had a short temper, but I hadn't expected him to lose control in a public setting like this. Either his recent dry streak in his business and private life had corroded his already short fuse even further, or I had massively overestimated his ability to read the situation. It was like Andrew once told me, it's easier to predict an intelligent and cunning adversary than the actions of a fool. And it was a fool that stood in front of at the moment. I took a step back from Vertorios, which he saw as my surrender, if I interpreted the victorious glint in his glaring eyes correctly. There were various reasons why I took a step back from him, but the one he assumed to be the one wasn't among them. I just didn't like to have people right in my face. Besides, staying too close to him would prevent my guards from having a clear field of fire. Raising my right hand to my face, I wiped off the spit on my face while giving the signal to stand down. One of my guards would see it and communicate it to the others. The situation wasn't so dire that I was willing to cause a bloodbath in the middle of a well-attended restaurant. Furthermore, it would deny me the chance to see how he reacted when he realized that he signed his own death warrant just this very moment. I had been willing to let him be if he left without making too much of a fuss, but I wasn't anymore. Not after he attracted so much attention to us. While he was ignorant of who I was and my position in the pecking order in Ilium society, the same couldn't be said about the other guests of the restaurant. One or two definitely knew me, and if I let Vertorios walk away unscathed or even backed away myself, word would spread, and the reputation I carefully cultivated during my time on Ilium would take a hit. A hit I could recover from, without question, but it would take me time and effort, never mind the resources I would have to reallocate to stop the idiots who would try to take advantage of my situation. I slowly lifted my left arm and activated my Omni tool, its appearance drawing a scoff from Vertorios. "What are you going to do, human? Calling Ilium security? I did nothing wrong. Besides, I've got friends on the force, and they know better than to bother me." "You don't have friends there," I countered coldly, while tipping on my Omni tool. "At best, you know some people that look the other way, if a pile of credits is in that direction. I, on the other hand, know the kind of people that can make your so-called friends deny you faster than a Krogan pulls his gun." Vertorios was about to say something, but my cold stare and the sound of a sent message stopped him. "And now you should move fast if you want to save anything of your company and personal savings," I continued, still staring him dead in the eye. His apparent confusion was enough to return my previous amusement. "What are you talking about?" he hissed. "And why should I believe anything from you?" A smile that some would call borderline cruel flashed over my face. Vertorios barely saw it for a second, but it was enough to make him apprehensive. A quick glance to the side confirmed my assumption that Detiovi was following the performance intently. She was eager to see what was going to happen, and I intended to show her something that would probably pander to her partialities. Ilium Union Bank, account number A3DR 3425. Volus Intersolar Bank, account number 9823. Vir 213. Palaven, First Bank, account number S32. KO 243, PO4. The first one took away any steam Vertorios may still have had in his system, and with every following account he got paler and paler. Well, if a Turian could get pale in the first place. Citadel Central Bank, account number CC 23422 DF 453F, Citadel Financial, ADE 2342. How do you know those accounts are going?" stammered Vertorios, all previous bravado lost. "I believe I already told you. I like to know about the people I'm dealing with. And what can I say? The people working for me are rather thorough. For example, they also found some nice evidence linking you to no less than 3 criminal organizations. Involving yourself in drug and weapon smuggling and people trafficking too? That's not what an upstanding citizen should do." I shook my head as if I was truly disappointed in him, but the knife-sharp grin on my face told another story. I was enjoying this. "And do you want to know what message I just sent?" I asked and took a step toward him. Vertorios took a step back at the same time and stumbled when his leg hit the chair he had knocked over. Sadly, he found his balance and stayed on his feet. It would have been funny if he fell on his ass. "I just put all your account information up on the extranet. Every hacker and cracker on this side of the Skillian Verge is probably trying to get into your account at the moment. If I were you, I would hurry to the Ilium Union Bank. Maybe you can save some of your credits before they're all gone. But I would hurry. After all, my friends in law enforcement just got a very interesting mail with some very incriminating evidence about a certain person. I saw the conflict in his eyes. On the one hand, he wanted nothing more than to bolt from the restaurant, grab the next shuttle, and try to save as many credits as he could before the law enforcement officers arrived and disappear from Ilium as fast as he could. On the other hand, he probably wanted to kill me for putting him in this situation. The recital of his accounts left him with no doubt that I didn't bluff and that everything I said was true. Thankfully, he chose the first option, and Vertorios ran out of the restaurant as fast as his legs could carry him. His choice may or may not have had something to do with the grin on my face that promised him that if he took even one step in my direction, he would like the consequences even less than his current situation. I watched as he disappeared from my view, making a note to have someone keep tabs on him. It wouldn't do to have someone with a grudge against me run around unsupervised. Vertorios wouldn't be able to do anything, but I detested loose ends. The smile on my face became a relaxed one as I turned toward the TOV, and I bowed my head slightly in her direction. I'm sorry that I interrupted your dinner, and hope this was enough to earn some of your forgiveness. An amused smile flashed over her face as she took a sip of her wine, the dark red, almost violet liquid staining her lips. How did you know that I prefer my dinner to be accompanied by a show? She asked, her tone flirtatious. If you allow me to take a seat and perhaps share some dessert with you, I'll gladly tell you. Her hand elegantly waved toward the fallen chair, and the inviting smile told me everything I needed to know. My hand grabbed the chair to put it back at the table, and as I sat down, I thought that the real challenge only started. Well, even if everything went downhill from here, I would at least get another slice of this heavenly cake.